special guests, Thomas Ernberg of Volvo India and S. Sandilya, President of the Autobody Siam. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. First off to you, Mr. Sandilya, is a diesel car duty justified?
Absolutely not justified. It will be a retrograde step. And I think we are actually barking up the wrong tree if you're looking at diesel vehicle prices being increased. As it is, the diesel vehicles cost more than the petrol vehicles. In spite of it, people buy that because of the vast difference in the petrol and the diesel prices. And also, diesel cars are more fuel efficient. After all, I mean, they are better in the overall economics. If you increase the price of diesel vehicles, what will happen? The diesel vehicle volumes will come down, the government won't get revenue at all. Instead of talking about diesel vehicles, which are just account for 0.6% of the total consumption of diesel, are being used by private cars and vehicles, we should look at increasing the diesel price by, say, 75 paisa to 1 rupee. Every rupee increase in diesel price will give the government a revenue of 8,000 crores. So 1 or 2 rupees increase in diesel price will not make a difference as against 7.5 rupees in petrol prices. My recommendation would be reduce the price of petrol by a couple of rupees and increase the diesel price by 2 rupees per litre. You will get more revenue, which the oil companies can also invest in R&D. And that's, I think, the right thing. Increasing the vehicle price is a retrograde step.
You're saying it's all right to have a slight increase in the price of diesel as fuel, but do not tinker with duties. Thomas Ernberg of Volvo, large cars, particularly SUVs, have been riding the diesel wave. What will be the impact on car sales?
Well, it's very difficult to say at the moment without knowing exactly what kind of duties, the size of the duties that they would want to implement on diesel cars in India. I think today India has a very high tax structure for CBU cars especially, and increasing it further, I'm not sure that it would have such a big impact in the luxury car segment. The luxury car segment in India is less than 1% of the total industry volume, so it's still a very, very small amount of the total industry volume.
Mr. Sandilya, even as you say there is a case for increasing diesel prices, it is inflationary in nature and it's a politically sensitive issue, and which is why the government is finding it tough to move ahead with a diesel price hike. In such a scenario, it's got to do something to correct the pricing of diesel cars. The fact that, that a diesel user gets a subsidy to the tune of 15 rupees a litre is something that the government thinks is unwarranted, and which is why it is building a case for a higher duty on diesel prices. How would you respond to this argument?
Actually, it's a convoluted argument for the simple reason that the diesel cars using this fuel is just 0.6% of the total diesel consumption. What about diesel generating sets? Who is using diesel generating sets for air conditioning the multi-storied buildings and other people? So if you have to tax the diesel vehicles, and all items of expenditure which are not going to farmers must be taxed. So I think we are talking about diesel being used in a certain segment. Actually, what is used in cars is a very, very small percentage. So we are talking about that as something which is affecting the revenue. I think it's actually a convoluted argument. I think we should look at diesel usage. It's a good fuel. Overall increase of 1 to 2% does not increase the kind of inflation substantially. We have gone through these kind of increases in the past. It's not something unimaginable. Yes, commercial vehicle usage will go up. There will be usage in the case of agriculture. The government, like what they're talking about fertilizer, can give it to the small segment of farmers who are using diesel, for whom we want to give subsidy. Give it directly to the farmers in terms of whatever we have the new Aadhaar scheme. We have got the numbers available. Let's give it to the farmers directly, like what the government has talked about for fertilizer. I think that's the right approach to do, rather than subsidizing a small portion of the people who are using diesel for farming applications. You are penalizing only some segment which is small, just less than 1% of the total consumption of diesel. I mean, where does it get into any kind of logic?
All right, fair point.
I just can't understand the logic. You're talking about 1% of consumption goes into private vehicles, and you're talking those vehicles must be taxed. What are we gaining? What about diesel gensets? Please tax the diesel gensets as well, equally.
Fair point.
Much higher, because they use much more diesel than what cars use.
Fair point. I get that point. Mr. Sandilya. Thomas Ernberg, but the fact is that the dynamics of the market has changed heavily in favor of diesel car manufacturers. How else can one reduce the discrepancy that currently exists in the market between petrol and diesel prices? The market is heavily skewed in favor of diesel vehicles.
I'm not sure that this is actually a wrong thing to do. Actually, the new diesel engines that the market has to offer, and especially also from Volvo Cars, are very clean cars, and they offer a very long mileage. So it's actually more perhaps environmentally friendly versus the petrol. If you would go into Europe, for example, you will see now bigger, more share going to diesel versus the petrol. So I would not be too afraid that there's more diesel cars being sold versus the petrol.
No, but, you know, Thomas, the question is, how are companies going to look at them and how will they cash in into it? Now, currently, this is an opportunity. How is Volvo leveraging the opportunity in the diesel market? Share that with us.
We have, from Volvo Cars' point of view, an excellent lineup of diesel engines. We recently introduced the smaller diesel engines to enter a new price segment in India, and that has proven to be tremendously successful. Our sales are practically 95% of diesel, and we do have petrol variants, but in India, especially in India, the diesel is much more in demand. So 95% of our sales are in diesel. So a price hike in petrol today, I'm not sure is actually going to affect Volvo Cars that much. Actually, we're more, I think, looking more to the long-term growth strategy. I think India, in general, is growing richer as a country. A middle class is growing, and I think when the middle class grows and gets richer, they're also more inclined to buy more luxury goods, and then there is where we think that Volvo Cars has a big share to take in the coming years to come.
Fair point, Thomas. I want to get Mr. Sandilya in as well. Mr. Sandilya, I get your point on the lack of an economic rationale for higher duty for diesel cars. But let's talk about the impact of such a move. Do you think if such a duty were to be imposed by the government, and the oil minister clearly thinks there is a case, then do you think that the capacity expansion plans, specifically with regards to diesel of a lot of the auto companies, will need to be relooked at? Or do you think it's time that the Indian auto sector invests heavily in favor of diesel capacity?
Each company will look at it from its own demand supply perspective. At the moment, in spite of the diesel cars being more expensive, the demand for diesel cars is high because of the substantial difference between the diesel as a fuel, the price of that, and petrol prices. Okay? If that narrows down, there will be lesser demand for diesel vehicles. Now, assuming for a moment they increase the duty on diesel cars substantially, what is the expectation of the government? People will buy less diesel cars? If the number of cars bought because of the high price is less. See, as it is, people buy if they have a larger running. Okay, people like us who don't have too much of running don't buy diesel cars, we buy petrol cars because it's economical to run a petrol car if it's a short distance operation. People who run long mileages, long distances, they use diesel cars. So having said that, now suppose the purchase of diesel cars comes down, that's the intention of the government, the diesel will still get supplied to the market at subsidized value. That means the subsidy, instead of going to the so-called car segment, will go to some other segment. But the subsidy will nevertheless be incurred by the government. Now, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to reduce? And I think if the intention of the government to reduce the subsidy that is being spent on diesel, the only way it can do it is to increase the prices marginally so that you keep reducing the gap, give the farmer the direct benefit through whatever means you can, and ensure that everybody else who is using diesel for other than farming consumption, other than the people who deserve it, charge a normal price, and it must get decontrolled. And I think let's get the oil companies right kind of money. They can invest for future. We want good quality diesel. As it is, the sulfur content has not come down. We are not able to implement Bharat Stage 4 in all over the country. We are still doing it in a few cities, only 13 cities, and the balance is coming in stages. And I think we need to call a spade a spade. The right time has come that we start spending investment.
How does all of this impact you, our viewer, the consumer, the buyer of cars? Volvo's perspective on that, Thomas, the question is how price sensitive is the luxury car market and the buyer? As Siam's, Sandilya is clearly saying, better to increase the fuel price of diesel rather than have any tinkering with duties. Thomas?
Two answers to this question. One is that definitely the Indian luxury consumer is very much interested in getting the best deal. So they're very price sensitive. And you could see that when you look at the pricing of the different luxury brands in India, it is very, very competitive. But at the same time, I would like to repeat that the luxury market in India, it comprises only of 1% of the total industry volume. With India growing as a country, growing richer, etc., that percentage of the total industry volume will increase and will have a positive impact on most luxury brands in India.
All right, watching out for demand, saying there is an upside irrespective, and the view from Siam pretty clear. Let's not bother the sector with duty changes. increase the diesel price. Gentlemen, really appreciate your time this evening here on the show.